What's up, everybody? Today we're going to talk about the Gospel Coalition public school debate video. um, so I'm not gonna show it on here just for copyright stuff. Can't be bothered. So if you haven't watched it, I wouldn't suggest watching it. It's not great. I watched most of 80 Robles' series, and by most I mean all of. Going through it, so I've seen the whole thing with his commentary on it. Normally I don't like to add stuff, or I don't like to regurgitate what other people have done. So I'm going to try to stay away from stuff that I've heard other people talk about. But there's some stuff that I wanted to talk about with the public school debate that I feel like wasn't in the debate, and that's the question of. One of the questions that I want to talk about is more the philosophy of public schools. And I feel like this isn't really talked about as much in the debates. We're like, oh, look, there's all this indoctrination. Oh, look, there's all this violence. Oh, you know, there's all this other stuff, excuses we give. Well, one of the problems with public schools is the system itself. The system itself is bad. It's not a good system. And so, like, I guess you could say there are benefits to it, like the fact that all children are able to go and learn. I guess that's a good thing. Not that they couldn't learn anyways, so anyways, so a problem with public schools is the institution in and of itself is bad. It's a Marxist idea, and so anytime that you give the government control over something, it's going to go bad. And public schools are no exception to that rule. So when we were debating public schools in our country, like one of the problems we mentioned was, like, you're gonna have people who you don't know teaching your kids, and so basically you have a bunch of eggheads in Washington who decide what your kids should learn in your state, in your community, like people you've never met, you've never elected. You have no control over what they think you should have to learn. Well, like, who voted them in? What gives them the right to tell me what my kids should learn? Why would I consider what they think is a priority is a priority? They don't know me. They don't live anywhere near me. They don't know what my community's like. Why should I care what they have to say? Why should my school system care what they have to say? And that's the problem with top-down public schools. It doesn't work. I mean, it does some things, so it's not like it does no good. I mean, kids are able to be taught, but kids can be taught better out of public schools. So basically, we've industrialized schooling. So schools used to be, you learned a trade. You learned what your parents taught you, or you had a private school and you sent them to that. And the parents were in control over what was being taught. Basic things. Now the kind of idea is like everybody should be like the Renaissance man, where the Renaissance idea of a man was, or a person, to use more modern vernacular, the Renaissance man was somebody who didn't necessarily, like, he may have like focused in one specific area and was really great in that, but also had a little bit of knowledge on about everything. So You knew a little math, you knew a little grammar, you knew a little history, you knew a little geography, you knew a little science. You knew you dabbled in everything. You read what you could, you knew what you wanted, and you didn't like pigeonhole yourself to one thing. Now it's not that you didn't like focus in one thing, but you got a breadth of knowledge. You knew you could talk a little bit about a little bit of everything, and I think that's a good ideal. Like that's something that I try to do. You know, I listen to people talk about things that I don't know anything about, so I can learn about them. You know, I like to know about different subjects. And not just solely focus on one. I mean, I do generally focus on one, but I also spend my free time in these other fields that I wouldn't normally talk about, just so that I'm more well-rounded rather than like a specific thing. Not that like mastering a certain top subject isn't a bad thing, but like you have little connection with everybody else if you only know one thing, you know. So that's kind of the idea of the Renaissance man. You know a lot of stuff. You may not know a lot about everything, but you know a little bit about everything, or you try to. It's more about the journey than it is like how much you actually know. Which is on a side note why I don't really care for like IQ tests. Like like IQ, like who determines what's on an IQ test? Like just because you like do poorly on an IQ test, like it's just a bunch of random like things that somebody has determined that you should know, and if you know those correct things, like suddenly you're considered smarter than other people. I don't know about that. Like that just doesn't make any sense to me. Anyways, public schools. So, but one of the problems there's a bunch of problems with public schools, is that the parent has no control, because the control is given to the government, and the government gave it to a bunch of unelected bureaucrats. The Department of Education, which I think we should just get rid of, because we just have no control over what they say. So, are you surprised that, let's say, Christianity was kicked out of schools? Well, it makes perfect sense. We live in a sinful world, and they hate God, so of course they did. Are you surprised that they're teaching a bunch of insane ideologies in schools? Well, of course not, because all they had to do was take control over the school board, and suddenly everybody in the country is learning about these things. So we also, another thing, we lost the battle on like sex education. It used to be something that parents were taught. Parents taught their kids, but now the school's like, oh, well, parents aren't good enough. We need to teach kids so that they have a better education. And what happened? Teen pregnancy went up. They're like, well, the kids are doing it anyway. I'm like, well, you can't see that you're the problem here. Like, talking to kids about these issues is what's causing the problem. Like, let the parents decide. Like, let parents take responsibility for their own kids. Like, what's wrong with that? But also we kind of industrialized school, and so a bunch of bureaucrats decide what they want people to look like when they come out of high school, and so they patent curriculum to get them to that end goal. And so every child is supposed to come out looking like this specific ideal. And the problem is, different people are different people. You have different cultural backgrounds. You have different intelligence backgrounds. You have different biological backgrounds. You have people who live or who learn differently. And so, like, this cookie cutter machine isn't built to uh, help people who learn differently than the curriculum is designed for. This is why we see like young boys don't do well in younger school, because like young boys learn doing physical things that they just aren't built to sit around and do nothing for hours a day. Whereas little girls, it's a lot easier for them. It's not that they don't have energy, but it's that they learn differently than little boys, and so now we end up with a bunch of boys who don't do well in class, and they don't know why. It's not their fault. They're just not built. The curriculum and the teaching style is just not built around a way to help them learn. And then we have people who learn differently. Some people learn by listening. Some people learn by seeing. Some people learn by writing it out or speaking it. Some people learn by doing it. Like they need to get like hands-on in the process. And lectures are designed for listeners. Everybody else, it doesn't work for. So that, like, public schools have these cookie cutter things where everyone must fit into this design or you're considered a failure. And not everybody's built for that. Like, it just doesn't work for every kid. And so that's one of the benefits of private school and homeschool, especially homeschool, is your parent has like a couple kids, maybe 5 or 6, and you can work with that many kids. It's a lot easier. And also the older kids help teach the younger kids, which actually teaching helps you learn. So like you teaching your younger sibling to help your parents actually helps you learn the subject better. So you have a lot of reinforcement in homeschool than you do in public school. I've been all three. I grew up in elementary school. I was in public school, and then I went to private school for 2 or 3 years, and then I was homeschooled through high school. So I've had all three. I know the best and the worst of all three. And the worst was public schools, because I could. I mean, it just got boring after a while, just sitting in the class and you have to wait for the slowest student to catch up. It's just, I mean, I had a similar thing in college where, like, there were classes where I was just so far ahead of everybody else. I was just like, this is boring. Like, but I got to sit through this lecture because while they reinforce the things that I already know. Yeah, so that's one of the problems with public schools there. We also have indoctrination, which is definitely happening. So like people have this idea of public schools, like when we got rid of Christianity, took the Bible out of schools, that it became this neutral place. But that's not what happened. Like, you can't, there is no neutral worldview. Like, every you don't take away a worldview and it's just replaced by nothing. Like, there's another worldview that comes in and fills the void. And what happened is secularism or atheism took over the schools. And so people were indoctrinated into the worldview of atheism. And so you had evolution being taught in schools. It didn't matter that scientific research is actually disproving evolution by the day. That's irrelevant. We're going to teach it. We can't teach that creationism stuff. We're going to teach our own mythology about somehow life it came to be over billions of years or whatever, and we slowly evolved from animals. Like, yeah, they can call that not mysticism, but yeah, right. So we replaced one worldview, the Christian worldview, with the atheist worldview. And so They became indoctrination camps for paganism. This is not a neutral place that you can send your kids. You're not sending them to a neutral place to learn neutral ideas. These ideas are rooted in a false religion, um, with false views about the world. And so I can't tell you how many public school kids I've seen who grew up in Christian homes, and then by the end of it, they weren't Christian anymore. I mean, a lot of them, they weren't Christian to begin with, but like they had the peak of like at church where they felt like they were, getting closer and closer to Christianity, but they spend what, like 40 hours a week learning atheism, and you are surprised when they come out atheist and they only have a couple hours a week in church. Like, come on. Like, even if you're not a Christian, like, and you're another religion, like, you're sending your kid to this indoctrination camp for a false religion. They're going to come out atheist. That's what the end goal the eggheads in Washington have designed them to be. Well, actually, atheism has been replaced. Atheism is no longer the religion that is being taught. It's actually New Age mumbo jumbo. So that's where all this sexual misunderstanding of the world is coming from, because we got a bunch of people, eggheads in Washington, who are way smarter than us, who are teaching this mystical sexual stuff, and they, that's the religion that's coming down the pipe now. And so schools are slowly becoming indoctrination camps for this paganism, this postmodern world, this new age religion. And how can you be shocked to see your kids come out of public school, after you put them in there for over a decade, that they come out and they're pagans? Like, how is that surprising? Your teachers are spending more time with them than you are. Like, it only makes sense. Also, you add the fact that the kids, like, they're indoctrinating themselves. One of the reasons porn is so prevalent is because of public schools. You have a bunch of, especially young boys. I think the average age for kids watching porn these days is like 10. And it might be younger than that. So if you have a 10-year-old boy and he's in public school, he's watching porn. Like, it's very, very likely. I'll tell you, the public schoolers that I've worked with in my youth group over the years, they've been addicted to it. The homeschoolers, on the other hand, they haven't been, because their parents are a lot more strict about what they have on the internet. Now, I'm not saying that parents of public schoolers are like being open and free in the internet, but you have all this time at school where you don't have any control over what they're doing. Like, it's all under the teachers and their peers. Like, that's where they're getting it. Like, even if you're strict at home, they can be wild at school. So, like, yeah, just so you know, that's going on. And it's because, again, somehow our culture has decided, these eggheads in Washington have decided, oh, well, we need to start teaching sex to kids before they start doing it on their own. They need to know what's going on. And I'm like, no, don't put that in their minds until you absolutely have to. Like, yeah, but that's just me. But yeah, public school is the place where porn gets indoctrinated into kids. And it's not just boys anymore. I mean, it's really prevalent in girls too these days. So that's where it happens. It's happening at the public schools. I mean, it's also on TV, it's also on the internet, it's also on all the social media sites. So it's not just public schools. But you have a bunch of kids who are getting it from all these outside sources, and then you cram them together and they're talking about sex at school, and you're surprised that they're getting addicted to porn. Like, come on. Like, I've worked in a private school before, and those kids may have talked about it, but it wasn't at school. It was not at school. That was not happening there. At least not where the parents were, or the teachers were, or leaders were anywhere near them. Public school, there's a lot more free time, in my experience. Anywho, so you have that. Now, in the Gospel Coalition video, which is just a train wreck. It's just a train wreck video. There's this like idea of missions. And I don't think that the lady, like, when I was listening to what she was saying, it almost seemed like she wanted to use her children as missionaries to the public school. And I don't know, like, what she's thinking with that. It seemed like she was saying both that they were and both that they weren't. Like, I'm just like, your kids aren't missionaries. Like, your kids need to be Christian before they can become missionaries. And one of the problems in missions is you don't send, like, brand new Christians who don't know the gospel very well into the world open, like, without knowing the gospel. Like, Paul didn't become a Christian and just get immediately sent into the world. You know, he had to be trained, he had to be taught. And he did. He was taught. He stayed for a while before he went on his first missions, you know. And he didn't go alone. Like, the idea of, like, sending children into school system so that you can be a missionary to them, like, that's just weird. That's just weird. Like, I agree we should be active in public schools, but because that's where sinners are. Actually, my family does do some of that, where they have a mission. They work for a missions organization that does school release time, where they bring the kids out of the school and during school hours, and if their parents are okay with it, and they teach the gospel to them. So there are things where people are doing the public school as a mission field. I'm not necessarily against Christians going as public school teachers so they can be a witness to the kids. Although you're gonna have to fight the system, which is gonna try to tell you to teach them this pagan religion, and so you're gonna have like a worldview conflict there. But more power to you. But don't send kids who don't know anything about the gospel, who are too young to really be able to defend the faith into the world when they're not ready for it. Like, we can, like, I was homeschooled throughout all of high school, and so were most of my friends, and we did all sorts of stuff together. While the public school kids were still in school, we were done with school. Many of us could finish, but before, there were days where I finished before noon, all that I needed to do, and I had the rest of the day with me, and so, we could take our school anywhere. Like, I didn't have to be sitting at a desk, in the same place every day to do schoolwork. Like, we could go on a road trip, I could do my schoolwork in the car, and, by the time we got there, I didn't need to do school anymore. So it's like, one of the nice things about homeschool is you can just do school wherever you are, whatever your life looks like. You can just go along with it. Also, you can spend a lot more time with your parents and your family and your friends. Like, I got to have lunch with my dad every day, just about. He'd come home around noon-ish, and then I'd have lunch with him. Like, I always looked forward to that. Um, you know, most kids don't get to do that, but when my dad came home, I had lunch with him. I stopped school and went and had lunch. I enjoyed seeing him, and then he went back to work, and I went back to school if I wasn't already done with it. Um, so it's like there's something that was really great. Sometimes I went to well, my dad was a pastor, so I just went to church, and did my schoolwork there, and then I roamed around the church, and I got to know the church really grounds really well. And then my mom was free to do whatever she was gonna do. So it's like there's so many more benefits to homeschooling. Like, I think that it's just a better program. I mean, even private schools is not too bad, although it costs a good bit more. Um, but yeah, and like especially these days where kids are just not getting a good education. Like, you got kids who come out and they can't even count. Like, they can't do basic math. And I'm just like, what are you teaching them that they can't remember math problems? Like, I get there's a reliance on calculators on your phone now. I mean, I use my calculator on my phone more than I think things in my head, just because it's easy. But push comes to shove, I can still do it in my head because I learned, I memorized the math equations as a kid. I can still do it if I have to. Like, so I don't need the crutch. Whereas there are kids these days who they can't do it without the crutch. And you watch. There may be a day where all this technology goes away and buckle up. It's going to be a rough life. If that happens, because you'll have a bunch of people who don't know how to do anything. And that's pretty terrifying, because people who don't know how to do anything, they don't act well, because they're gonna survive, and so that gets pretty dangerous. So yeah, just some interesting thoughts there. And I'm not saying all public schoolers are stupid. I'm not saying that all public schoolers can't come out Christian. I'm not saying that. But there seems to be a majority of public schoolers, a higher rate of like people who lose their faith in public school because they're taught all this garbage. Now, one thing I might disagree with some guys, like once a kid reaches high school age, I could see them choosing on their own to go to public school. For mission field. Like, if God calls them to go to the public school so that they can be missionaries, if they've been strong enough if they're strong enough in the faith, I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. But that's a child, that's the choice between the child and the parent. Really what I'd like to do is I'd like to see us move toward a school choice where people have more freedom to move their kids to whatever school they want. Ultimately, I'd like to get rid of the Department of Education, but yeah. But in this debate, and I don't think they talked about it at all, the problem with public schools is not all the indoctrination that happens at schools. The problem with public schools is the structure itself. It's not a good structure. It's fundamentally flawed to begin with. And so the indoctrination is a symptom of the problems with public schools. When the debates were happening for public schools in the early days in this country, what was the argument that was said, that was prophesied? If we do this, we're going to have people who basically are determining what kids are taught, and it's going to be misused. And guess what it was? It happened exactly as predicted. So we should get rid of public schools. Obviously, we can't do that right away, immediately. We have to have a replacement. I think COVID was really, really great for a lot of parents to see, oh, I can actually do this. I can actually teach my kids. I mean, part of that was just them seeing some of the awful things that public schools are teaching the kids. But also, like, it's easier than ever to homeschool. It's easier than ever. There's so many jobs out there. It's not that hard to get a job. There's so much material out there that you can use to teach your kids. It's so easy. It's so much easier, and you're never going to regret all the time that you get with your kids because you have a limited amount of time. Because once they move out, like, they're not moving back in, most likely, hopefully. So, but even if they do move back in, they're going to be an adult, and they're going to act like an adult, and they're not going to be your little kids anymore. So, like, you have a limited amount of time with your kids. I would highly encourage you to use it. There's lots of information out there to help teach the kids. They don't need everything that's taught in public schools. Just like things like calculus. I've never once used calculus. I love math. I would love to learn calculus, but I don't need it. I actually didn't have to learn calculus, but that's an example. Like, I've never needed it. I didn't really need geometry. Like, I don't think I've ever really used it. I never needed to learn how to diagram a sentence. Like, it's just not something that I need to know. Like, I still never really understood the concept, even though I was taught it. It was somehow I passed, but it's not something I really need. Like, I can use language pretty well. So there's just a lot of stuff we teach at schools that aren't necessary. Teach your kids the basic stuff, and I'd even say move away from college and go more for a trade school. Don't force the kids into a degree that they're going to have to pay for later on, that they may never use. Like, encourage them to get a job and get a degree as necessary, depending on what they want to do with their life, Give them time to figure it out. There's no rush. They have all the time in the world. Like, I think we should be encouraging our kids to get married a lot earlier. Like, get married and then worry about college. Like, college is less important. It's becoming more and more obsolete, which I think is a great thing. And part of that's because there's so much information out there. I feel like we're getting more and more to where you really don't need to go to college unless you have like a special field, like medicine or something, because there's so much information out there, and a lot of the fields that you could study, like, you could get most of the information online, like, which is awesome. There's some, like, hands-on stuff, like maybe archaeology. Like, you should probably go intern under an archaeologist. Like, there are ways to get this experience without paying for a degree. Like, if you're gonna be an archaeologist, why do you need to know, like, calculus or something? I don't know. Maybe you do. Maybe it's part of digging. I don't know. I've dug a lot of stuff, never used calculus. Anywho, I'm not an archaeologist. Anyways, that really went off the rails there in the last 5 minutes, but let me know what you think. I felt like one of the things that didn't really get discussed in this debate with the Gospel Coalition, which is just a terrible group, which is why I watched the video through AD and not straight on there, because I couldn't tolerate the whole debate by myself. I needed some humor thrown in there. Thanks, AD Robles. So I went off the rails there, but I hope you enjoyed that. What do you think? I think the problem with the Gospel Coalition video is that they didn't really get to the heart of the issue, which to me is the fundamental problem with public schools. So I guess they were trying to more like application. We should we send our our children to these indoctrination camps, yes or no, application wise. But I felt like if you got to like the fundamental principle, the failure of the whole in general, like I feel like that would be a lot more helpful, because be like, well, obviously you don't send your kids to an indoctrination camp where they're just going to industrialize education for your kid and force them to mold into a cookie cutter pattern that whatever the eggheads in Washington have decided it should look like. Why would anybody ever in their right mind do that? But I say that as a half-baked product of the public school system. I got the rest of my training from private and homeschool, so at least early education. So those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think. Do you disagree with me? Let me know in the comments. Do you like the video? Give me a like. If you agree with me, tell me why in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinions on that. What do you think of the debate? And you should all, of course, go check out AD's videos. He did a really good job breaking down the individual arguments. Not really what I wanted to do, but he does a great job over there. So go check that out. I'll catch you next time. Peace.